welcome to today's meeting of the Strategic Planning Committee. Will everybody please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. We're gonna try to get this through by 2 o'clock, because selfishly I have a 2 o'clock meeting, so.
Excellent.
So there we go. All right, so with that, we go ahead and do roll call, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Director Bradford,
Here.
Gallardo absent, Jennings absent, Lozano,
Here.
Sander.
Here.
Villegas.
Here.
Vice Chair Soon, absent, and Chair Saragosa.
Here.
Is in the building.
Soon is in
Oh,
the building.
oh, wow.
Okay, great. Thank you.
He
He's
might
lurking.
be at the other meeting. I don't know what it is.
Okay, well, we'll hope he makes it here.
He's lurking somewhere in the building. All right, do we have any public communications this afternoon?
There's no public communications.
All right, then moving right along, we'll go to our first action item, which is approval of a contract for SAC-RAC software, and Mr. Mendoza has this item for us.
Hi, good morning. How are y'all doing today? Miguel Mendoza, analyst with the planning and programming team, and happy to be here and present this item to you today. It is an action item, and so I'm going to read off the recommendation here that the committee recommend that the board approve an overall budget not to exceed $854,729 and authorize the executive director to one, execute a 5-year contract with the vendor for $700,386, and two, amend the contract for additional features and modules for an additional maximum amount of $153,892. Today, I'd like to go briefly over what the software is used for, why we need it. Second, why we recommend doing a sole source procurement for it. And third, a brief cost breakdown of what we have. As a MPO, Metropolitan Planning Organization, we're required to produce various documents, but one that's important is, as all of them are important, but important to me, right, is the Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Program. This is basically a document of surface transportation projects, a list of them. And there's various requirements, but generally if we have a federally funded project in the region, it needs to be in the MTIP. In addition, if we have a project that requires federal action of any sort, usually from the Federal Highway Administration or Federal Transit, it needs to be in the MTIP as well. Each of the MPOs in California, all 18, prepare their version of the MTIP. We call ours the MTIP. Generally, it gets called various other things. The MTIP is rolled into one big document every even numbered year, which we are in. And it gets submitted by the state to the federal agencies for approval. For that all to happen, all of our project listings need to be in another system, and I'm going to use the name here, California Transportation Improvement Program System. I'm going to say CTIPS just for ease of use. It needs to be all in CTIPS. So Caltrans is maintaining the system, and all MPOs have to have all of their projects in there. Us in particular, we use SAC-TRAC, but as a statewide whole, the playing field looks like this. Of the 18 MPOs, 5 utilize software that directly will integrate with CTIPS. 1 has developed their own, which would be our friends at MTC, which is the Bay Area MPO, and then the rest use CTIPS directly. Of the 5 that use software that integrate into CTIPS, they all use Eco Interactive. So we, inside of California at least, we have sort of a good survey of what everyone uses. For us, we have had SAC-TRAC or a version of it since 2005, all with the same vendor, Eco Interactive. And I think we were the first MPO in the state to use this software with them. So we've been with them for a long time and have helped sort of develop the system alongside them. In managing this MTIP, I think it's good to also mention the scope of what we're really managing in this document. So at a very high level, this 4-year document, which is one of the requirements, right? It covers 4 federal fiscal years, contains about 620, well, exactly 628 projects for the current iteration. And it has approximately $3.8 billion of funding. And that's a mix of federal, state, and local. Federal funding making up about half of it, state making up about 33%, and then the remaining being local funding. And so you can imagine kind of conglomerating all of these projects into one system. It's helpful to have something that we can use. A benefit of a system like this is that we can have real-time collaboration between our partner agencies and us. CTIPS does not currently have that. In fact, only MPOs can change projects in CTIPS, and that's already an exception to the system. CTIPS is also used by the state to manage various funding programs, including SHOP and Highway Bridge Program. And again, that's a very close system. It's already an exception that MPOs get to use it. The SACTRAC software also allows, in addition to working real time with our local partners, for anyone in the public who's interested in seeing what projects that the region has, to run reports on it. Currently, we have an ability for folks who want to see the projects to sign up, get an account, and run any reports that are available to them. And so that's a brief of why we need the software, why we're requesting to keep using the software. I'd like to go over why we're recommending a sole source procurement for this. Understandably, that is an exception to the procurement method. And so to get to this recommendation, we did a couple of things to really figure out our path forward with the software. One of the things we did was, of course, reach out to our partner MPOs, not just within California, but also outside. Thankfully, we are able to reach out through the Association of MPOs to get contacts, and we've done that. And so looking at inside and outside of California, we've talked to perhaps a dozen or so MPOs. Specifically, ones that we're interested in were ones that did a competitive call for proposals on this, right? We want to see what's out there. And of the dozen that we talked to inside and outside of California, one being in California, they're in progress of making a contract, so I can't say finally what they're going to approve on, but the rest of them have either decided to develop their own or have gone with the Eco Interactive route. Really, again, we're seeing this as a niche product in a niche market, and we're seeing there's one vendor being available. Additionally, we explored how we've actually procured this contract in previous cycles. So again, since 2005, we've had a number of cycles of acquiring Eco Interactive services, or at least soliciting for software services like this. Apologies. So we looked at the state's purchasing lists, which is normally how we would go through something like this. And indeed, when we looked at the list, which is publicly available, what we found was there was no off-the-shelf or ready product for a TIP management software, Transportation Improvement Program management software. Other than on this list, specifically with the state, there were 3 resellers of Eco Interactive software, not Eco Interactive themselves, but resellers. And so while that's an option, we don't recommend it for a specific reason. The state of California will charge a reseller 2% for being used if you're on the list. On top of that, the reseller will charge approximately 3% for their own profit and for their own overhead. And so we would be looking at the price that Eco would charge the reseller and then 5% more on top of that. While it's an option and it's something that we can do, again, that increase in cost is something that we wanted to avoid as well. And so when we're looking at other software, there are other grant tracking software out there, right? There's project tracking software. But the specific need with SACTRAC, and I've probably alluded to this during during these remarks, but really need to put it out there, is if we don't have a software that integrates directly into CTIPS, we would be doing double the work. We would be doing what other MPOs are doing, which is basically maintaining their project lists in Excel, working with sponsors through phone calls and emails, and then importing the changes somehow into CTIPS in comparison to what we do now, which is we work with our sponsors directly in SACTRAC, and then upload the changes to CTIPs. And it's relatively seamless in that way. And I think that the large list of projects that we have, of course, makes us much more efficient in using a system like this. If in your staff report as well, as I go through real briefly here, the cost structure, you'll see that we have a base price for the software, but also optional modules. And in the first table, we have modules that we've selected as something that we'd like to go through with or recommend executing, and then a second table for optional modules. You'll see that there's also a one-time upgrade cost on there, and I'd like to clarify why that is. And again, if more detail would be in the statement of work attached to your packet as well. The one-time upgrade costs are not costs that ECO is going to charge us for upgrading or making upgrades to the current system, refreshing the look, making it more responsive, making it easier to use, but rather custom features that we've sort of developed over time with Eco Interactive that need to be carried over to the new software that it currently doesn't have. So it's a lot of development hours that gets included in there. The optional modules part that we have also included in your packet are modules that we don't recommend using now, but would, of course, as needs change, possibly like to use in the 5 years that we have the contract if approved. And then the costs are also there as well. And so when we're looking at the cost, we're looking at $700,000 roughly for the base software plus one-time upgrade costs, and then the 3 modules that we'd like to use if approved. And then table 2 is 153, almost 154,000 for optional modules. And that's why we're asking the 2-part recommendation there of executing the 5-year plus options for the additional if needed. And so I'm going to close my remarks there. Again, statement of work at the end has all the details, everything that we're asking of this software, and then plus a breakdown of the costs as well. So happy to answer any questions or comments that you might have.
Great. Thank you, Miguel. Yes, question. Correct.
I have a quick question. On table 1, we have the long range plan module. I don't see any cost in there. Is that included in the base? Is that why that is?
Yes, yeah, we wanted to and in because it's not included in the base, but they're not going to charge us for it. I think probably a sense of goodwill. I didn't want to look a gift horse in the mouth on that one and
Sure.
ask why.
Okay, and then the second piece of this, our approval of the table 2, the optional modules, would those be as needed, or how would that work?
Yes, so that would be as needed. We don't have to take any of these options, but the reason we wanted to include these is optional as well, and I'll sort of use one as an example, integrated GIS, for example. If our data and modeling team at some point during this 5-year contract decide, hey, this would be a really useful feature for us, we could execute it in any of the 5 years and add that on, but certainly no need to use any of them if we don't want to.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I've had one. I mean, just one, it sounds like somebody needs to invent a competitor to this particular programming. But I mean, for that cost over a 5-year period, I mean, and I know there's obviously legacy costs, but is it almost cheaper to hire someone just to run this thing full time than a 5-year? And then, because obviously this isn't going to go away. It's going to be in perpetuity, this type of contract.
Correct. Yeah, I don't know if you meant for me to answer, but I will offer some information. In talking with our partner MPOs across the country, the market is moving, right? Whenever there's an inefficiency, it will eventually get filled by something else. So it seems like there are interested parties in creating something like this because we are not the only MPO. There's a lot of MPOs out there that are still using Excel. Of course, happy to talk to you about that offline, but I can't say anything since nothing is final.
Understood. Okay.
Maybe I'll just add briefly onto that. So certainly we have the option in any of our agreements to terminate them. So at some point, if there's a more advantageous option on the market, we could certainly move to that in the future within this 5-year period. But it is a considerable amount of staff work, as Miguel mentioned, to move off of this, and the accounting risk, right? It's like moving from Quicken to an ERP system. You really need to have that certainty that we get through having something like this. So that's our justification for the cost, for sure.
Okay,
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Is, in general, do, our respective entities, is our staff allowed to work with your team and for output, running scenarios, that kind of thing?
Correct. Yeah. So that's one of the biggest advantages of this is we have city and county staff directly in the system. They all have accounts, and they can put changes in, and we can work real time. I could be looking at the same screen that they're working on.
Perfect.
The other thing I might add of added value is every iteration of a project in the system gets saved. So we can go back to 2006 and see what a specific project looked like in 2006 versus now. And it's been a really powerful tool for us to be able to have that.
any other questions? Do we have any public comments?
There's no public comment.
All right, seeing that, we'll close public comments, bring it back to the board for further discussion or board action.
I'll move to approve.
Second.
All right, we have a first and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, thank you, Mr. Mendoza.
Thank you.
And Chair Saragosa, just as we segue into board rules, typically, obviously, that kind of item would not come to the Strategic Planning Committee. It would come to the Policy Innovation Committee. We did not have a Policy Innovation Committee this morning. We're trying something new there as well, which is to not have policy every month. And so that is why we did need to get this through to the board for final decision in a couple of weeks. So that's why you're seeing it just, but now back to the regularly scheduled programming, things that maybe feel more strategic. And we'll introduce Mike Maurer to give you an update, because I know, obviously this committee has been looking at board rules for a little while now. We couldn't get exactly the right, everybody in a smaller formation, but we could get a few of you just to bounce this off. And Mike's going to give you the presentation here. Go ahead, Mike.
All right, thanks, James. So I think I can go pretty quickly here because we went through this at the last strategic planning committee meeting, and there isn't much that's different between then and now. But what we've done at the last strategic planning committee, there was a suggestion that we meet with a smaller group of board members and kind of go through, not necessarily line by line, but give a hard look at the board rules and what we're trying to do. So we did meet a couple weeks ago with Chair Saragosa and directors Bradford and Villegas. And so we went through everything. And like I said, it's a lot of what you saw at your last meeting, but I'll go quick, but I'll just run over a few kind of high level changes. There are two things I'll note that came out of the small group meetings that are a little different. One is we had brought to the board, or to the committee, excuse me, the concept of increasing the board stipend from $100 to $125. One thing we weren't sure about was whether we should tie that to some kind of an index so that it automatically increases. And what we've ultimately included in this draft that would still be up for debate decision is it just indicates that the stipend will be reviewed from time to time. That way there's some direction for the board to come back and look at it, but we're not automatically increasing how that goes. The other change that came since the last time is I had included a provision that it's actually a Brown Act rule that would let me, as SACOG's general counsel, discuss closed session discussions with any of your city attorneys or county councils if it was an item that had potential liability for both parties. So for me as general counsel, it's always a little unnerving to have more cooks in the kitchen when you're talking about liability and things that can get out there. But ultimately, we wanted to do it because we serve the members, and if the members have potential liability, it makes sense to discuss with the member. The suggestion that came up was to include that provision, but with a caveat that if the member agency is directly adverse to SACOG, then that member agency would step out of the closed session and we wouldn't share information in that case. So I think that's a smart compromise. It lets us talk about mutual liability, but it doesn't put anyone on level ground if we're actually directly adverse. And so beyond those two changes, the ones we made before, just from a high level, a lot of the changes were just general updates, things like changing mailed notice to email notice and things like that that we do differently in 2024 from 2025. There was also a lot of gendered language in the prior version. So we're suggesting removing all that. At the time, it was standard practice to say he or she, and that's no longer the standard practice in 2024. So we've written it so that there's no gender references at all. And then there were already some provisions about community outreach and things like that. And this committee and the SACOG board in general has done a lot of work over the last few years with its strategic plan and racial equity action plan. And so we just wanted to make the language in here consistent with the language in those plans. So some of what we were doing is just getting that language consistency. And then some of the bigger changes, and again, there aren't a lot of changes. This isn't anything that's wholesale different. It's just some changes around the margins. We did put in a more specific procedure for calling a special meeting. One of the changes actually in talking with the small group was to always have a special meeting request go to the board chair first. If for whatever reason the board chair is not inclined to call a special meeting, but there is a critical mass of board members who want to, then there's a procedure in here so that could happen. We also included a more specific procedure for delegating an action to a committee. This is something we've done in the past. It's something we've looked at fairly recently, but it was never specifically put into the board rules. So the key there with that procedure is we've made it clear that any delegation has to happen in public, the action has to happen in public, and the board can come and comment at that committee meeting where the action takes place. And then we also included a provision that the board could add non-voting or ex officio non-voting seats to the council or to any committee of the council. So that's something I know it's came up at a board meeting fairly recently. There was a question about that. So this doesn't actually create those seats. It just provides the opportunity if it's something that the council as a whole wants to consider. So that's pretty much it. I'm happy to answer any specific questions, but otherwise an approval today would send this to the board next week for the board to get final approval.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Maurer. And then thank you as well for all the input beforehand and over the last couple of meetings. So didn't know if anyone had any questions of Mike or in general. Yep.
I guess I do have some concerns about the 1 to 125. I mean, it's not much, but just the optics of it, given the timing of the budget, state budget and everything. I mean, why only $25 if at all? And then, then this time, I think, just seems like it just doesn't seem worthwhile to me for us to do for $25.
So, Mr. Chair, so in developing the recommendation on that, we did look at, obviously what inflation would have been since 2005. It would be much greater, closer to 170 or so. But we did a survey of our peer entities around the state, and they're paying reimbursements anywhere between $80 and $150 for attendance at similar meetings. So more had in the last couple of years moved to 125 or 150. So that was part of the thinking. We certainly understand the broader concern about the state budget. We did make a provision within our budget to ensure that we could afford it in the SACOG budget, at least, should you move forward with it. But it's your decision in terms of whether to move it forward.
Okay, I appreciate that. Yeah, I would definitely say that's one we could come back to later, in my opinion.
Any other thoughts on the pay?
I have another question on a different part, but I'll speak to this. But it's neither here nor there for me, really. But I do take Vice Chair Soon's comments, seriously, in that we don't know what the state's going to do, and the optics of it may not look very well. on us. So, like I said, it's neither here nor there for me. I think, like you said, Darren, that's $25 and, if we put it off for another couple of years, that might be the better time to do it.
Any other thoughts on that? Yeah, I don't mind leaving it up. I mean, if we want to leave it as a recommendation and see what the whole board wants to do, or we can, pull it back, I suppose, as well. What does everyone think?
I'd rather pull it back. Are you okay to pull it back? Yeah, I'd rather pull it back. Once you get out to the whole board,
Yeah,
yeah.
makes it tougher for them.
It
It doesn't really matter to me one way. Yeah, $25 per meeting is not gonna.
none of us do this stuff for the money, right? And I just think it's a double whammy. It's like you only talk $25 and it'll be an issue for some when it doesn't need to be.
I'm good with that.
Yeah.
Do we want to?
I'm in favor
So
of
we,
all that.
is everyone good with everything else, the other changes in it? Regardless, we would make the recommendation with the changes as proposed by staff, but with the, deleting the, $25 increase to board meetings.
I am but I do have a question,
Yes.
and this is for Michael. On section 2, item I, where you spoke about the release of confidential information regarding litigation. I've read through it a couple of times, and it looks like there's nothing in there specifically that says that you have the ability to talk to a city attorney or county counsel. It does reference the director having the ability to pass through information. Is that legally what you're saying still? Or does it need to specifically say that SACOG's general counsel can pass the information on?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So the language that's in there is pulled straight out from the Brown Act. And under the Brown Act, it does say that the director can speak with their own city attorney or county counsel. I've kind of, in my head, taken that a step further in that generally, sorry about that. Generally, if there's a joint defense common interest is what it's called, then if like one person's in the cone of privilege, then you could bring everyone in the cone of privilege as long as you're working together. So technically, yes, it would be the director could speak with their own city attorney or county counsel. But practically, you, me, and your city attorney or county counsel could all sit down together. And I'd be comfortable under that rule. I could pick up the phone and call any of them and have that discussion.
Okay, that was my question. I figured the practical application is going to be myself or, talking to my city attorney saying, hey, call Michael and let's get this hammered out. But I just wanted to make sure we were okay with it in the rules as written.
I'm okay with that.
Any other questions or clarifications? All right, seeing none, do we have any public comments on this item?
There's no public comment.
All right, we'll close public comments and bring it back to the committee for further discussion or a motion.
So moved with the revision to pull back the increase.
All right, we have a first and a second. Thank you both. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, measure passes. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mike. And I like the fact that you have a drone in your background as well.
Yeah.
All right, we'll move to item 3, which is our information item and our an update to our 2024 work plan. And Mr. Corliss has this for us.
Okay, Chair Saragosa, thanks very much. Director Sanders said, I thought we just had done this. And yes, indeed, 3 months ago at your last February Strategic Planning Committee meeting, we did indeed talk about the 2024 work plan. This is also your last Strategic Planning Committee meeting scheduled before December. And so we wanted to give you a little bit of where do things stand? What are some milestones and some successes? We want to give you a little bit of a preview to look ahead to next year. some kind of key challenges. And then I also, not to bury the lead, I wanted to suggest, if this committee is interested, we might try to find about a half a day sometime later this summer or the fall to actually get you in a deeper conversation around our work and our direction over the next 2 to 3 years. We're going to do a board retreat next year. That's on the calendar, but there will be a lot of new board members at that retreat. And so with this body, that seems to be appropriate. All right, so let's get right into it. A reminder, in 2022, you updated our strategic plan, includes a new vision statement, redrafted mission statement. SACOG convenes and connects the region to advance an equitable, sustainable, and prosperous future. So again, that was coming off 2022, which was not that long ago. So the initiatives that we outlined in the memo for you, and the ones that I know you have a lot of, you've had a lot of, you sunk your teeth into and are sort of front burner, if you will, this calendar year. The blueprint plan, the MTP SES, I don't have to tell you that, it's a big one. Green Means Go, and making sure that both we secure funding for Green Means Go. We oppose the cuts that have been proposed in the state legislature, but also the key question of how do we knock down barriers. Transportation funding and key projects and advancing those key projects, we'll get into in a sec. And then, of course, the Race, Equity, and Inclusion, or REI initiative. So just on a couple of things to take a moment and recognize, there's been both from last fall and this spring already, I think, quite a number of things that are you should pause and understand are pretty significant. On Green Means Go, of course, and this took years, but the $34 million in state funding, that is the funding that is now being proposed to be cut. We are working as hard as we possibly can to, again, to push back on those. You know that we just got the recent news, great news of a Reconnecting Communities grant from USDOT. And again, I will remind you all, that was SACOG plus 10 cities and counties going together in that $22.5 million grant. So we went as a team. We went really multi-county, multi-jurisdiction, and we were able to prevail. And now the big one that is pending, you had it in, if you were cap to cap, you heard us talk about the Climate Pollution Reduction Grants, or CPRG, $93 million total grant, actually put forward by the Air District, covering 7 counties, because Nevada and the Tahoe Basin were part of our US EPA region. The good news is South Lake Tahoe wants to do a Green Means Go project. So they are now in for the first time. And we have 40 million of that 93 for capital projects for infrastructure to support infill. So that is pretty impressive, as some of you may remember from just 4 years ago when this seemed like a dream. We got our bill, of course. Thank you again for all of you that helped on getting our AB 350 through the legislature last year. That was not easy, and is a reminder of how difficult it is to actually pass a piece of what seemed to be at the time simple legislation to extend our deadline. You, again, in some ways in lightning speed, created a regional toll authority. That was actually, believe it or not, that was on a very draft 3-year work plan to be created in 2025. So you beat that one by a year. Again, congrats. I know that wasn't easy. And now, of course, the key pieces here are going to be standing up the toll authority, advancing those toll projects, and the like. And there's a big meeting next week at the California Transportation Commission to try to get YOLO 80 there to move. Speaking of YOLO 80, we revived, as you may remember, the Mega Regional Working Group. I would say revived because we actually had an MOU with the Bay Area and San Joaquin County, but it had been very hard to meet in person across those 16 counties. And honestly, Zoom and the ability to do remote meetings allowed that group to restart its work in 2020. I think some of us were wondering kind of what's the value add here? Where's this going? But I can tell you, if you've joined us on any of our lobbying efforts and advocacy efforts, either back in DC or in the state capitol, and I know Director Bradford was with us just a couple of weeks ago, it makes a big difference to say this Northern California group of 3 MPOs has a dozen projects and we're aligned in full support of them. It really makes a difference. So Third Track to Roseville was a project that got fully funded just recently. Yellow 80, as I say, stay tuned for that. And then, of course, Valley Rail. We're hoping to get ACE and Rail up here by 2026, and then the North Valley Rail extension up to Yuba, Sutter, and Butte counties. You've heard this from our staff, but record engagement in the MTP SES Blueprint outreach. We've learned a lot through that engagement from your fulsome workshop last summer in June of 2023 to the mini grants we provided to community-based organizations that gave us a record number of responses, more than we've ever had. So we've learned a lot in addition to getting more outreach and stepping that up. The board took a great action on the prioritization of the grants for Cap to Cap. You remember you worked on that a couple of months. You made your final action in Woodland at the March board meeting, and we took that one pager back. When I was in those meetings at Cap to Cap and our members of Congress said, so how can we help? And we said, see the first page in front of you. That was a great message because we weren't coming back with problems. We were coming back with real projects and things for them to do. So that is going to continue though, and I think that was relatively painless, but that was just the projects that were active for federal grants. And so one of the things to push this a little further is, can we, in our long-range plan, can we in the region have a short list of projects that really are true regional priorities? And that's going to be a challenge. We're going to move to a 6-county funding round, as you know, but I would just say the milestone here is I think we've probably done more engagement both with the board, but all of our public works agencies and transit agencies. So stay tuned on this, still in progress, but we've also been able to renegotiate MOUs with our Placer and El Dorado RTPAs. That has been done successfully because that has not been easy. The brand new world of a 6-county federal funding round. But I think at least from Chair Saragosa's perspective, with your experience with El Dorado County Transportation Commission, I think is a success. And then finally, again, in progress, but trying to translate a lot of our REI work, but also a commitment to community engagement and listening to community-based organizations, standing up our Engage, Empower, Implement program, and stay tuned because this summer we'll be doing very soon a call for projects. And but I do think that's gotten a lot of attention. So some milestones. Okay, I just got a couple more slides here. They're in your printouts. So question of board engagement, and I throw this out here as we often try to do, but I think a question for you to either think about right now and respond to, or as we go. It is remarkable that those of you that were here in 2019 to adopt the last MTP SES, only a third of you remain who adopted that plan. So there are 2/3 of our 31-member board are new since January 2021. That number will obviously increase as of next January. So when we say, you remember, and the board adopted 2019 MTP SES, and the majority of you could put your hands up and say, no, we don't. We weren't here. And so the question really is, and we also know that as elected officials sitting on multiple boards and commissions, you know, you have a lot in addition to the job that you were elected to, right? You have a lot to do, and you have a lot of responsibilities. So how do we engage you in our work? How do we engage the SACOG board in our work beyond simply the committee meetings and the board meetings? You know that we've thought a lot about this over the years. In fact, many times we meet you before you even join our board, Director Bradford, that you join our tours. Director Bradford actually came to us through our Cap to Cap tours back in DC. He said, this is really interesting. I want to learn more about this. Those are intensive, but they're very effective. And obviously we don't go into Denver in a little over a month. We're doing that peer region tour. The local tours, as you know, we've rotated the board meetings now around the region. It is also dawned on us, and I guess I should have seen this earlier, and maybe this group might be an exception, but we are, I think, more the exception than the rule to multi-county boards and commissions. I know some of you sit on sometimes 2-county boards and commissions, special districts, but there aren't a lot besides maybe GSEC and maybe a couple of others that really have 2 or 3 or 4 or more counties involved. And so it's been hitting us actually, especially as we've done a lot of our racial equity and community engagement work, as you all say, well, my community is different. It has dawned on us. So let's actually understand how your community is different and rotate those board meetings around the region. These are all up for grabs, right? Up for discussion and feedback. And then, as I mentioned, we will be doing a board retreat next year as well. I can either take any thoughts now, or we can run through the next couple of slides and we can do discussion at the end and board engagement. Keep going. All right. Okay. So challenges ahead. These obviously relate to some of the key initiatives I started off with. And again, those of you that have been around our series of discussions around the long-range plan, we are going to move from a phase we're in right now with the blueprint of the land use scenario and the housing forecast that needs to be adopted in June, and then the transportation scenario and which projects are in or out, and the fact that we don't have enough revenue for all the transportation projects, another tough one. We're going to move from that phase into a phase next year where the question will be, what does it look like to have a locally owned regional plan? That we see ourselves in that plan. What does it look like to not feel like this is a one-size-fits-all plan, but it's I see my jurisdiction. I see my large county, my urbanized core jurisdiction, or my small rural area, and we're all unique. What does it mean to have a regional plan that we see ourselves in, that is truly our plan, and not have it feel like this is a plan that's quite technical and has a lot of mandates that we have to meet. So we don't have all the answers on that. That's why I'm posing that to you. But I have actually started posing this question I'm meeting with every city manager and county executive this calendar year. And that's the first question we're asking them. And I will tell you, it's a really interesting set of responses we're getting. Starting with, oh, I thought this was just a formula, kind of one size fits all. We have to just go with the program. And it isn't. Infill development.
If I can interject just for a second, it is a serious question, right? Is it locally owned? As long as I've been on this board, this has been the question. As a matter of fact, before I joined the board, my joke used to be, yeah, SACOG, they do whatever they do, no one knows, right? The dollars seem to be attached to it somehow for transportation. So by and large, out there in the community, that perception, I don't think has changed that much. People who aren't here probably don't understand a lot. I mean, transportation on its face is bad enough. But then, everything sort of in here is difficult to translate to our peers who aren't in this board.
Yeah.
Let alone, people making decisions on businesses or, government or investment elsewhere in the community. It is a big, big lift to sort of try to understand what happens here. I mean, I can't even say I have a decent understanding of it at this point, right? There's still a lot of mystery for me.
Well, one of the things
Because there's so many technical issues. So the idea of making it locally owned is a challenge, a worthy one, but a challenge.
So look, here's one of the ways to think about this. You could make the argument that we spend a lot of time in this agency, on this board, and at our staff developing a plan. We don't spend enough time implementing it. And so, but one of the things, and that is something I don't know if everybody outside the boardroom appreciates, but we have spent a lot of time on, I would say the last 5 or 6 years, is how do we sort of partition off pieces of the plan in bite-sized pieces, big bites, that are about implementation. Green Means Go, as you know, Director Sander, that is directly an implementation of our plan. The Mega Region Working Group is a direct implementation of our plan. So we've been trying to take pieces of our plan that go beyond just transportation money for the projects that you come here to try to get money for, and actually are regional initiatives, right, that we are trying to advance. And we don't often talk about them as achieving our greenhouse gas target or achieving, but they are really something that tries to meet, right, local jurisdictions where you are. So we have, I think, a number of those initiatives. I think that's probably one of the best ones I can give you. To sort of to be able to translate that. I think there's, so I know Director Soon.
I wonder also.
You already got your mic.
I wonder also, to Director Sanders' point about the understanding, everybody views this as, you're in or out, and some of that option 3 conversation might take some of that away. And that is, it might give people a better idea of that trigger point, because I think we can visualize entitled, developments, right? the things that are in planning and they haven't gotten entitlements yet, but then, you know, applicants are saying they're gonna move forward. I mean, when you spread that out across 6 counties and 22 cities, it gets very complex. And then coming back to your comment about implementation, how do we navigate when projects might move faster in Yolo County than down in Elk Grove or vice versa? So what does that implementation look like? If my thought is if there's a way to gain an better understanding of that, then people won't be, for lack of a better term, afraid, right? That they're not in the plan at that particular moment. And again, I remind people, we update this plan, right? Every several years. So that plan, you know, is a living document, but everybody forgets. And so it's like you're in or out. And I think that creates a lot of anxiety. Director Villegas.
Yeah, and on exactly that point, and I'll say this again, I actually believe as part of having the plan, we get to partake in when the plan, the implementation of the plan happens, even when it's not in our jurisdiction. So for me, I actually believe that it's great to be invited to, when there's a SACOG funded transportation project in Elk Grove, whether I can make it or not, to be invited to have a little more chance that I might actually be able to articulate what the region's work is accomplishing in Elk Grove, while my constituents may not necessarily care about it on a day-to-day basis when they're getting out of their neighborhood. They'll care about it when they're trying to get through I-5 or 99 to get south through Elk Grove, or whatever the case might be, or when something's happening in Yuba City or Galt, it doesn't matter. But I think the opportunity to celebrate that and at least have a little more knowledge about what we're doing collectively does bring a sense of ownership to it that goes beyond, if it's not in my district, I don't care. Right? It forces us to think about it more regionally. And I think that's one opportunity that we have to own it a bit more. My sense.
Yes.
Just to comment and not to try to get way into the weeds today, because I recognize what our role here is, but I think some of the understanding can come from a more forward-facing educational process with the community, whether it be a transportation or housing community, maybe some principles and guidelines of what does it look like for you to, you know, what are we looking for in the next plan? And what can I do to, as a local agency or a private entity, do to ensure that I'm doing things within the principles and guidelines so that what I'm trying to accomplish does either get into the plan or better aligns with the plan ahead of time. Does that make sense? And we had this conversation, Director Villegas and I and Clint the other day about what does that look like? And why does it have to be this big mystery every 4 years when we go through this process? Can we come up with some really, really forward-facing, hey, here are the principles and guidelines that we're looking for that will reduce VMT. And I'll tell you, in my jurisdiction, traffic circles are absolutely hated. And there's a group of people that absolutely love them, that have worked around them and been in them. And so that's one example of, I think, you know, what we can do to get the word out a little easier ahead of time so that people aren't guessing. And when the time comes for those transportation projects and we have to make decisions on funding, it would be nice that everybody was on the same playing field, knowing what the, you know, the principles and guidelines are moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Rich. The need for those principles in particular that are sort of publicly accessible and understandable. I was in a meeting at the White House a couple of years ago, and the Chief Information Office of the United States said, what percentage of all the reports and plans and data that you file, that the federal government requires you to file, is actually looked at by a human being or utilized in some way? 1% is the answer.
I was gonna say 10.
1%. So 99% of it is like keep busy work, and then 1% used. Right? But our colleagues out there, I mean, you and I have this perspective on a lot of what we do, right? Our city council agenda is filled with yeah, we gotta do that because someone said we have to do it. What does it mean? Unclear. So we have to, garner more meaning in this because it does have real impacts on people. And, it's not just a plan that sits on a shelf, it's a plan that determines how we spend money. And more than that, if we execute it well, we can get more money than we're supposed to.
Right.
As other regions might, as the do-nothing region might, because we have it.
Right.
So buried in there is a reason why this is important, people should engage, and we need principles to explain it.
I did one more thing. So locally owned, right? There's a locally understood, right? But also locally owned is, in other words, if you don't agree with the land assumptions, if you don't, and then subsequently to the transportation projects that were commensurate with that, you can say, that's not my plan. You're not bought in, right? So there's the understanding of it, and then there's the buying in of it. So I think, the principles and guidelines are helpful for the understanding. I also think, the understanding of, hey, there's opportunity to adjust, and we know this is an organic thing, taking away that anxiety, then there's an opportunity for buy-in. And so then together you get locally owned. That's just how I'm thinking about it.
I just want to echo, from personal experience, I think that's absolutely true. As one of the 2/3 that was not here the last time, I kind of entered this process and I felt like, gosh, if my local land use is off, it doesn't, and when I say off, doesn't mirror what I believe will happen in my crystal ball locally within my jurisdiction, and my transportation projects aren't in there, it's the end of the world. Right? But in reality, it's not, right? We update the plan again in 4 years. And while it might feel like the end of the world, specifically if there is a project that you anticipate, legitimately being ready to break ground and move forward in the next 4 years, then maybe that's a different story. But if it's not, then maybe it's not quite as serious as, I as a director might feel that it is, right? I had a great meeting this week with Yuba County staff and SACOG staff to talk through some of the specifics in my jurisdiction about some of the land use assumptions. And I said, hey, I think that by 2050, this number is not accurate at all. And here's why I think it's not accurate. And they said, okay, well, in 4 years, if something different is happening, then we'll put in the reality of what's happening in there. And it was like, oh, okay. So this isn't like, I think we really tend to view it like this is between now and 2050, to where, well, yeah, that's kind of the goal, but really that goal could be not goal, that data and that environment could look different in 4 years than it does now. And if it is, then the plan's updated to reflect that, right? So they explained it's really based on two things. It's based on past performance of jobs and or housing in a specific area, right? So if you have an area that has almost no past performance, that's a pretty clear indicator from that standpoint. And, do you have is dirt being moved in this project? Oh, dirt's not being moved. So you're pretty confident it's going to be moved in the next 4 years, but hasn't been moved yet. And it's not being moved now. So, and if it's moved in the next 4 years, then we'll update the plan to show that it's moved in the next 4 years. And it was really beneficial for me to go through that because it explained the rationale behind those choices, right? Because I understood there's a limited number of housing units, there's a limited number of jobs. There's kind of a crystal ball as to where they're going to be, but what's behind that crystal ball, right? What's the actual process that staff's going through to put them here versus here, right? And it's based on what's the history in that specific development area and how close are things to reality at this point in time, right? And you look at those two things and you go, oh, well, based on history, based on where the project is, okay, I can understand why it might not have the number that I think it should have, right? So it was super helpful.
I went through the same thing because when I saw the original matrix, I'm like, there's no way that this is the trajectory of these development projects that I've known to be around since I was elected in 2000. And when I sat down to have the conversation, I was like, okay, that makes so much more sense. But until you go through that exercise, at least for me, I found the exact same thing. And I would have lost my shirt if I'd have bet on that. Lost my shirt. several times over, because it takes me a while to learn the same thing. So I lost my shirts. Yeah, none anymore.
I mean, maybe to sum that up, it is, and I know you all know this from being on here now a while, but a lot of what we do, a lot of what you do as a board is you come up with plans or you award money that has a limited sort of entrance to lots of people who want to get in, right? That you can call it picking winners and losers. That's sort of people don't like that term, right? But whether it's a funding round or a long-range plan, right? There's a binary sense of like, I gotta be in, or I'm on the outside. And look, we're gonna go through, and I think it's hopefully will be very interesting to look at this option 3 coming up at the board next week, right? And how could we think about new growth areas differently? At the end of the day, I think we have my sense is some pretty clear unanimity. We want more infill development to happen. We want it to increase because we've got all of these aging, older places. We want to knock down the barriers to that. And we're going to have new growth areas. And where we do, we want them to be not just, yes, GHG and VMT low as possible, but actually places that are going to really hold their value. And we've talked about this, Director Sander, right? Like that, I think we can agree on. So how do we get those two things to happen through the plan and through commitments and through local ownership? So, all right. I've mentioned infill here. Other challenges you've got ahead of you this year and next. We gave you a little bit of a preview of this if you were at the Transportation Committee, but as we do for every plan cycle, more requests for capital and expansion projects. Overall, transportation we have money for, but particularly expansion. And I would put that is true on the highway side as well as the transit side, right? So we have to think a little bit about, as we've done for prior plan cycles, available funding that's reasonably available versus all of the things, and the balance between expansion and refurbishment, and then operations and technology. We talked a little bit about REI, race equity inclusion, and how to keep on integrating equity into our programs. And then finally, and I would say this is not necessarily something that we have traditionally done, but we've gotten more into housing over time. The thing that we heard loud and clear in all of that outreach we did on the MTP SES, and we told you this, is housing, housing, and housing, right? So the supply, the affordability, the product type, like that is something that I don't think is going to go away in this region anytime soon. And so one of the questions, and we talked to Chair Saragosa about this, is what is the region doing and should be doing more of? What's the role of SACOG? What's the role of our local jurisdictions to tackle this issue? So that's an excellent topic for a half-day retreat coming up. Yeah.
Could I just make a comment on that real quick? As it relates to housing, and I was talking earlier about how, having some guiding principles out there for people that build communities or build housing or even transportation projects for that matter for our local jurisdictions. Is there a way that we can say what SACOG would like without taking away the local control, of course, right? Our general plans are there. But what SACOG would like is for new developing areas or even infill, quite honestly, they must have a certain percentage of alternate modes of transportation developed into them. Can they have, so many percentage of the missing middle housing and those kinds of things? Is that something that we can do? And if it is that something we should look at?
Maybe I'll try to start in on that conversation with sharing that, one, there are principles that exist from actually the original blueprint.
Right.
Those blueprint principles still are in use all the time in your SACOG work. And we do sometimes get requests for SACOG to comment on a project according to the blueprint principles, and we will do that. So in that sense, yes, they exist. You also have the opportunity in this plan, if you want to have some, additional principles that are specifically related to this long-range plan you're implementing. As it relates to, for a specific project, which is gonna be in a specific geography for a specific community, having specific targets, I would be hesitant about that because every community is so different. We can say across the region, we may want to have, you know, the target of a certain amount of active transportation or, you know, a mix of housing. But very much so the way that plays out across all your communities is not one size fits all. And so that, I think that's what we hope to work with you and your jurisdictional staff, right? Is how do we take with this, whatever the final discussion scenario is, right? There will be a mix of housing in that discussion scenario. And if you decide to adopt that, then the question is, how do we make that happen? And the mix of housing is going to be different in every single community. So that's just one example of how I think we might want to think about it.
I totally hear what you're saying, and I guess our general plans are what kind of decide how that happens, but if our general plan, and I'll give you an example in Galt, I think we've done a decent job of trying to bring in higher density housing. In fact, right around the corner from a big park in our area, there's, you know, medium to high density housing going in. They're like going vertical this week. So, but as I look, let's say I were to look to see, hey, this piece of property is available. What am I able to do with that? And what is the city going to allow by the general plan? I should be able to go and say, hey, this is what they're looking for in general with the general plan. And also, this is what it's going to do to reduce GHG and VMT, and be able to marry that before I make that, either make that investment or make that investment into a project.
Yeah. I think this is fertile ground. I think, as Casey said, you know, we want to be thoughtful, I think, about, because what we don't want to do is like the cookie cutter, like, you know, to get the SACOG check mark of approval, you need 20%. However, and Director Sander and I talked about this last week as well, right? I think, and this is why I'm excited to go to Denver, because one of the things I think we still need to work on as a region is not allowing our aspirations to be chopped down and downzoned. And, you know, we've had many examples of this, right? So how do we collectively, so that it's not just you and Galt where, you know, maybe a developer saying, look, we had talked about multifamily, it's not going to pencil. That may be true market wise, but I think, as they have found in Denver, sort of holding the line collectively, right? Like, hey, we're in this together. We want a really good product here, is one of the lessons learned. Another lesson learned, I think, and this again may be true for both new growth areas and infill, is transportation, right? We can, especially in new growth areas, we hear a lot about, and I'm not trying to throw cold water on some of these plans, but like if it's further away from light rail or RT or YOLO TD or wherever we are, we'll have a shuttle, right? Like, we'll include a shuttle. It'll be great. We'll get people. It is really hard to make that happen. Like, it is really hard to make. And so I don't know how, right? But I think what I do hear is there's again, general consensus. We want new growth areas to be kind of dynamic, vibrant, and have as many transportation choices as possible. I just hear that almost from every company and developer but how do we actually make it happen on the ground, right? I mean, you say this all the time, and like that's the plan, but how do we actually implement it and make good on it? So we have not had a role in that really, other than blueprint principles, which again, as Casey's saying, I do think have had a shelf life to them, a good one. But there does seem to be, I think, a lot of interest now by lots of jurisdictions and lots of developers in how do we actually truly make our, whether it's an infill proposal or a new growth area, right, as multimodal, as transportation choice rich as possible. And again, we don't have the answer to that. I think it's a great question to ask.
Anything else? 2025?
Okay, one last slide. Just ending on next year, just looking ahead. It'll look a lot like your previous slides because these are not one-year projects. So But next year is a lot about, we mentioned locally owned blueprint implementation. So I would encourage you to keep asking me that question. What does it look like to implement this plan? And to get commitments from all of our partner agencies around the region. Green Means Go implementation. There's so much we could say about transportation, but I'll name a few. The Trails Plan. You've approved an RFP to get out there now and look at what it would take to accelerate that Trails Plan, which we're very excited about. The Toll Authority we mentioned is a startup effort, and so we need to make sure we provide the care and feeding to that. And then we've had some discussions recently on this board about public transit in particular and the financial health of public transit, right? And how do we make sure that we have really good, healthy, financially sustainable transit agencies that are increasing ridership. REI Working Group, great question. The REI Working Group this year is going to be wrapping up and making recommendations on the Racial Equity Action Plan and how we might want to think about that going forward in next year. And then we've got more in terms of board engagement, offsite meetings, board retreat. And then we have a big question to ask ourselves, which is, if any of you remember AB 350, we basically took a sunset provision on AB 350 to get it through the legislature, which means we are not on a permanent schedule for 25 and 29 and 33. We're on a temporary schedule, and we'd go back and revert to our original schedule, which then also throws us, well, it goes back to the original RENA schedule. So we need to figure out if we want to actually try to make this a permanent thing. And if so, we're going to have to mount a pretty significant legislative effort, which may impact RENA, may interest a lot of our housing stakeholders, and stay tuned. And that's it. I mean, it's nothing really.
Yeah.
Just, but again, if there's interest, and you can certainly ping us afterwards, I think we felt like it would be good to get the whole strategic planning committee together a little later this year, just to get you in an offsite location, think a little bit about the couple of years ahead, 2 to 3 years ahead. Some of these, we're trying to tee that up. And your questions you're asking, frankly, this afternoon are exactly the kinds of questions that are great fodder for a strategic planning conversation. Anything surprising here?
Any questions, comments?
That's good.
All right, thank you, James. Moving on to other matters. Do we have anything? Okay, with that.
Just that you've got the Color of Law book reading at Mulvaney's, 8 a.m. On Thursday, May 16th. We have Beale Air Force Base coming to kick off our board meeting. We had a great tour with Director Bradford and Vice Chair Soon and others, and Director Teeter last Monday at Beale, and Beale will be here at the beginning of our board meeting on May 16th. And I will tell you now, because we've been briefing Chair Saragosa, you got my evaluation, you've got the board rules. We probably have an agenda that we're going to have to do some real-time audibles with Chair Saragosa over there to make sure you get out on time. But hang with us. And if you haven't already signed up for the 8 a.m. Mulvaney's Color of Law, that would be a good discussion. Okay.
Thank you, James. Just before I adjourn, I also want to thank James and Gary for that opportunity to tour. If you guys didn't know, but there was basically the whole West Coast we have a radar system that sees the whole thing. I don't know if you guys knew that, but I didn't know that. That's incredible over at Beale. That's a lot of, it's a wide band to see. So it's fascinating. Thank you.
If you haven't ridden in a chase car following a U2 as it touches and goes, it's highly recommended. All right.
Keep updating.